Hey, Connexus Church, Aurelia Berry Online, good to have you. My name is Mark. We are doing a series based on my latest book called The Problem of Lfe. If you haven't got a copy of it, pick it up. It is 11 principles for your life to flourish versus flounder. And we're talking about 4 of those principles in this series, and this is week 3, where we are talking about turning struggles into strengths. And there was a verse that captured this for me, kind of a random verse actually, but I saw a lot in it in my devotions and Acts chapter 20, it just says this in verse 1. When the uproar had ended, Paul sent for the disciples and after encouraging them, said goodbye and set out for Macedonia. He traveled through that area, speaking many words of encouragement to the people and finally arrived in Greece. And it's kind of like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, let me tell you a couple things that have to do with our life. First, it says when the uproar ended. So what does that mean? Well, he had just preached to all of these people in Ephesus. 50,000 people then got in a big uproar against the preaching of the gospel. He got up and he shared about Jesus, and all the people there were like, we don't like this. We're making money over here. We're doing this. We don't like anything that you're saying, Paul, and so we don't like you. And they uproared and they said, great, as Artemis the Ephesians. For a couple hours, they did this crazy stuff. So this reminds me of, I was preaching in, there was a youth conference I preached at last year, and they asked me to come preach, and I got up there, and I don't preach to youth a ton, and so I feel like, okay, I'm gonna get up, and I was telling them the story about the fact that a couple years ago, my daughters and I have 3 daughters, for those of you who are new, and I talk about them quite often, and we were going on this walk through this forest, and there was like this guy all of a sudden shot out of the forest, and he was like, dressed up like a wizard, and he was 25 years old, and he comes out and he's like, wee, I have magic rocks, wee, and he kind of ran off, and I'm like, what was that? And then this guy comes out with this sword, and he's like, where did the wizard go? And I'm like, oh gosh, they're shooting a movie right now. And I'm like, girls, come over here, let's stay out of their way. And this other guy comes out, and he's like dressed up with these elf ears, and he's like, no, we're not shooting a movie. And I'm like, well, then what are you doing? And he's like, it's called LARPing. Whee! You have magic in you. And I'm like, what the heck is LARPing? And I looked at him like, live action role play. These guys are just playing games. They're 25 years old. And I looked at my daughters and I said, you see those guys right there, girls? Don't ever marry that. Right? And all of a sudden, so I remember telling that story at this youth conference. And every time I tell that story, when it's adults in the room who are mid-40s like me, they laugh because what a bunch of losers LARPing around, get a job. But none of these youth laughed. They were offended, and there began an uproar for the rest of my sermon. They were like, get out, and they weren't connecting with what I was saying. I was like, my gosh, this is what the Apostle Paul's dealing with. He said something that offended his crowd, and they don't want to hear what he has to say about the gospel anymore. And yet, here's the beautiful part about this. It says, when the uproar had ended in Acts chapter 20, verse 1, Paul sent for the disciples. So if you got a Bible, underline that word disciples, because here's the beautiful thing. Oftentimes what happens is, and maybe you're like this, you are critical of the church maybe. Right? And as you look back though, I used to be critical of church. I didn't grow up in church at all. I didn't come to church till I was 19 years old. I didn't ever want to come to church because in my mind, the church or the disciples in the world were just like every church, everyone was going to be average age, 200 years old. It was going to smell like mothballs and it was just going to be old. And so I didn't want to do it. And I had all these critical views of the church. I had all these the church is just full of hypocrites and the church is full of judgmental, narrow-minded people. And maybe that's some of you thought that. And yet we see constantly that it's the disciples, it's the church actually that is doing amazing things in the world. It's the church that's moving things forward in the world, which of course the book of Acts is a huge story of the church moving out. And so there was some stats that Rodney Stark, who's a sociologist, pointed out recently. He said, The church is the primary source of secular charitable funds that benefit victims of misfortune, whatever their beliefs. They're the dominant in the ranks of blood donors and other pro-social behaviors. They're much likely to commit crimes, right? If you're here and you're coming to church, you're probably less likely to go out and like stab a dude tomorrow, right? I'm just not gonna lie to you. Statistically speaking, we're less likely to kill a bunch of people or go rob a bank. It's like, oh, yes, Lord, give me more, Lord Jesus. And then you leave here, you're like, stick it up, right? Probably not gonna happen. Doesn't happen very often. People who go to church are far more likely to donate their money and time to socially beneficial programs and be active in civic affairs. The impact of religious people on volunteering alone is an estimated $47 billion annually in the United States. And urban stats going back from present day to the 1920s show that the higher a city's church membership rate, the lower its burglary, larceny, robbery, assault, and homicide rates, right? The church tends to be a good for the world. And so if you're here and you're critical of the church, maybe you've been reluctant to the church, I'm just saying, here's the interesting thing. I used to be judgmental. I talk to people all the time who are judgmental. And there's a legitimate skepticism, but then there's an over-the-top skepticism where people go, oh, the disciples in the world, the church, they're full of bad people. I hate the church. Listen, we got to be very careful of that because, listen, in the book of Revelation, you know what the book of Revelation says is that the church is called the what of Christ, the bride, right? The bride of Christ. And so Jesus is coming back one day, and I don't know how many of you, but if someone talks negatively about my bride, about Erin, I don't just sit around with them and go, yeah, I agree. Like if they're like, yeah, Erin's a real loser, I'll be like, yeah, she's a real loser. I'll be like, what did you say? You can't talk about my wife like that. Listen, Jesus Christ is coming back one day, right? And he's going to be riding a horse, and he's got a sword, and he's coming down. He's got some wrath. He's going to be like Will Smith at the Oscars, all right, walking up to Christmas, just to keep my wife's name out your mouth, right? That's the church. Jesus Christ loves the church, whether you do or not. He uses it in all of its imperfection, and yes, the church is full of hypocrites. Connexus Church, if you are here, you are probably a hypocrite. You are sinful, a mess, narcissistic, wretched, pitiable. I mean, I get it. You are, listen, I talk to people. You know what the problem with the church is? People are a mess, right? And listen, if you are looking for the perfect church, if you find it, here's my advice to you. If you find the perfect church, please do not start attending there, because you will ruin it, right? You are a disaster. You are selfish. The church is a wreck, but because the gospel of Jesus is true, the church changes the world. Connexus Church. This is something, it shouldn't be a bad name coming out. It's like these are the disciples of Jesus, and they're changing the world. You and I together under the grace of Jesus changing the world. And so often what happens is people blame they project blame. They blame the church, they blame disciples, they blame, and it's really like, I remember when I was running Village Church, we started this church in 2010 with this small group of people, and it turned into all these campuses and people coming to know Jesus, and it was really cool. And I remember this guy came to our church, and he was sitting there, and I got up and I was using some sermon illustration about, I said, Thor. I said, you know, the actor, you know, Thor is a really hot guy. And then I'm like, my wife thinks Thor is super hot, right? And this guy gave me an email, just this scathing email. I don't need to come to church and be sitting with my wife and hear that Thor is hot and put that in her head. And I'm like, bro, if you think it took me to tell your wife that Thor is hot, you got other things. Bro, what are you talking? Your wife already knows. Chris Hemsworth? Yeah, what a dog. What are you talking about? See, here's what we do. We blame the pastor. We blame the church. We blame the kindergarten teacher who didn't tell me that I was good enough. We blame our parents. We blame everybody else. And the gospel comes along and says, you got to take responsibility for your life. Be the church. You have a task. You have something to do for the world, which we're going to talk about next week as we talk about our purpose. Our very purpose in life and existence. And so here's what happens. Here's the beautiful part though. Look at this verse. This uproar turns into something beautiful. And this is what we're talking about. Struggles, look at what happens. The uproar had ended. Paul sent for the disciples, because they're the church, they're going to make things happen. And after encouraging them, said goodbye and set out for Macedonia. Here's the thing. The uproar leads to encouragement. The uproar, the difficulty, the tension, the criticism actually leads Paul to go, I need to encourage these people. Here's the thing. Those of you who've been to Connexus before and probably heard my story, my parents got divorced when I was a kid, and the trauma of that event led me to have Tourette's syndrome. Okay, Tourette's, not a way to be cool in high school. I said random weird words growing up. I make noises. I used to swear at people all the time, like just literally sitting there like say random swear words, which by the way, the one job you're never going to get in life when you randomly swear at people is a preacher, right? It's not going to make any, welcome to Connexus, get in a small group. It's not going to work. And yet, I had obsessive compulsive disorder, and I'd have to hit things a certain amount of times so that bad things wouldn't happen to people. And when I share those stories, here's what happens. People find freedom in Christ. How many people have come up to me and said, Mike, watching you up there, twitching your face around, making weird noises, knowing your story about obsessive compulsive disorder and how God healed you of it. I had a woman come up to me after I explained that I used to hit things a certain amount of times so that planes wouldn't crash and bad things wouldn't happen to people. And she walked up to me crying the next day, and she said, my goodness, for 25 years, I have thought in my brain that if I don't fold this towel exactly to that end, that my husband's gonna die in a car crash. Or if I don't touch this to a certain thing, my kids are gonna, and she said, I had never knew anyone else in the world thought like that until you shared your story. And here's what I realized, that my brokenness gave them permission to be imperfect. And this is what happens in life. God takes our struggles and turns them into strength. He takes the things about our life that we would never want, and he turns them into strength. He turns them into strength for you. I read this quote the other day. It says, I've never met a strong person who had an easy life, right? Some of you have had a messed up life, a difficult life. God takes that, Romans 5 says, and he takes those struggles. Struggles are part of our life. The fall means that we face difficulty and evil and sin and brokenness and disease. Some of you, you're going through stuff. When you're got crowds this size, Aurelia, Barry, online, there's disease in this room. There's abuse in this room. There's shame in this room. There's guilt in this room. There's things that have happened to you because the world is broken, and the biblical story has the best explanation of sin, sins that have been done to you, sins that you have done, and you are broken. And those struggles, God can take them and turn them into strengths. Suffering produces character and endurance and hope, Romans 5 says, because God takes all these things about you and he says, I'm going to use you to not only become stronger yourself, but to bless others so they become stronger. My wife and I moved from Toronto to Vancouver in 2004. We got married, jumped in a car, and disappeared to Vancouver. And we knew nobody. Nobody's friend, nobody's uncle, nobody. And we showed up to Vancouver and we pulled up, and the house that we were staying at, there was this locked door, and we went inside of it, and we went up to the third floor where our little apartment was as I was going to school out there. And the first night, I'm like, what's that smell? And the guy right below us was smoking weed, and it filled our whole apartment. And I was like, oh my gosh, hot box this apartment reminded me of high school. I'm like, oh, I gotta get chips. Yeah, we gotta get out of here. And my wife's like, what is that? She's crying. She's like, why did you bring me here, right? A city we don't know, pot smoker below us. This is gonna be a disaster. This was night one. And we cried, and we felt alone, and we struggled. But you know what? We prayed more together in that season than we'd ever prayed before in our life. We did it for 5 years. See, the struggles can be turned into strengths. God can use whatever you have been through. And he says, give it to me, right? And I will give you rest. Give it to me. We're talking about the guy who suffered as a part of his very identity, and that's part of our life too. Jesus died on a cross. They call him the son of suffering, right? He died on a cross. He was beaten. He was flogged for you. It was part of his identity in life and turned it into the saving of the world. God can take our struggles and turn them into strengths. This is what happens. And so what does Paul's struggle turn into? He gets the uproar and he turns it into encouragement. He looks at these people and he says, I want to encourage you. Underline that word in your Bible. He encourages them. Do you know one of the things that we need the most in life? I was talking to, my boss, the founder of Bayside Church, he founded the church 30 years ago. His name's Ray Johnson. He's an amazing leader, amazing pastor, preacher. And he talks about the fact that one day, one of his daughters had this project at school where she had to go and interview a leader. And so she came home from school and said, Dad, I want to interview you. And they got together and she said, what is the number one thing every leader needs? And he says, without even thinking about it, I could answer that question. The number one thing a leader needs is encouragement. If they wake up in the morning discouraged, they are going to derail. And it's the same about you. You and me, the number one thing we need in life is what Paul gives to these leaders here. He encourages them before he goes. How many of us live in a... Have you ever seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Some of you watch that movie probably every Christmas. A masterpiece movie, It's a Wonderful Life. This year I was watching it, and something stood out to me, right? It was the opening scene, one of the opening scenes where the two angels, of course, George Bailey, for those of you who haven't watched the movie, George Bailey, he's thinking about like ending his life. He's so depressed, he doesn't know what to do, and he's really down, and the two angels, which are like represented with these two lights kind of in the sky, they're talking to each other, and one of the angels is like, hey, come over here. I want to assign you to go down to George Bailey. And the angel's like, oh, okay, what's up? And he's like, well, we got to go down to George Bailey. We got to help him out. And the other angel says, oh, is he sick? And the other angel says, no, it's worse. He's discouraged. That's the opening lines of It's a Wonderful Life. Is he physically ill? No. There's something worse than that. He's discouraged. How many of us live in a culture of discouragement? Every time we go online, every time the default setting is to criticize. Because when we criticize something, whether it's a spouse or people online or kids or whatever, it's the default setting in the human heart because you think it makes you sound smart. It's easier to be critical. If you're an encourager, people are like, oh, you must not be bright. But if you're a critical thinker, oh, they're so smart. They're so sophisticated. It's easier to sit around and criticize people. That's why when you go out with people for dinner, what's the fun part? When you're criticizing somebody, right? And then it feels really good. And you're like, oh, that person, I can't believe he did this. And I can't believe she did that. And you have your nice dinner. And then a couple weeks later, you're like, we should go out with them again. And you go out with them again and you do the same thing because it's fun to be critical. You don't just sit around and pray for the people you're being critical of. You don't sit around and encourage them. Paul does the opposite. He says, in a culture of massive discouragement, which we live in every day. Listen, I have 3 daughters, right? And so we have this, the other day, my wife had to cook. She was doing this event, and she had to bake 300 cupcakes, okay? So she spent 10 hours baking 300 cupcakes with my youngest daughter, and I got home, and they looked at me, and they said, listen, I have one task for you. Now, I have a dog, or a boxer. Raise your hand up at all the campuses if you have a dog, right? You love dogs? Great. How many of you have boxers? All right, these things they're maniacal, all right? They're all the time, constant energy all over the place. And this dog will eat anything, all right? Just like, what? Underwear, blah, 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 blah. Oh, tree, blah, blah, blah. Like just not smart. And so my wife said, listen, we got 300 cupcakes. They're on the table. You have one job. One job. Sit on that chair in that dining room and don't move. I don't care how long I'm out. I'm going to be gone for 2 hours. If you want water, get it now. If you got to go to the bathroom, get it now. Because when you sit there, because if that dog eats those cupcakes, it will be unforgivable. I will never forgive you. This will be no more. And I'm like, okay. And I'm sitting there, and literally as she's saying all this, my brain starts to go like, this is a lot of data. And my 18-year-old from the other room, no joke, yells out, stop saying all this. You're setting him up for failure. And I'm like, she's like, it's gonna be a sermon illustration because he's gonna fail. And I'm like, man, I live in a world of discouragement. Everyone's always critical. My kids are critical. Dad, what's wrong with you? Listen, you know what I need in the morning? Encouragement. So do you. And this is the magic of what the gospel does. It comes into your life and it goes, don't you understand? Jesus Christ came and died on a cross and took away your shame and your guilt and your sin and the things that you've done that you feel bad about, and you walked in and you don't feel good enough. And Jesus goes, no, I've taken it away as far as the east is from the west. Be encouraged. Wake up tomorrow and go get it. You don't have to worry about your past anymore. It's gone. I care about your future. I want to encourage you. I want to gift you. I want to do something beautiful and amazing in your life. This is what happens. Here's this practical thing that I want you to do. Okay, so this week, I'm going to be super practical for you. This week, here's my challenge. What if every single day for 7 days in a row, until you gather next week, you encourage one person in your life every day? Text them, email them, DM them, Lord forbid, call them. All right, sit down with them, whatever, and take a minute and just send and I don't just mean like, hey, go get it, bro. I'm talking about, hey, Tom, here's what you've meant in my life. Imagine all of you at all the campuses every day this week encourage one person. How many thousands of people would be encouraged this week from a text from you? Like a detailed, honest, here's how you've affected my life. Hey, this is what I've seen in you. I just felt like I needed to encourage you. We could change the world this way. Because listen, here's the thing. You want to know something? We're Canadians, okay? So we're just polite people. We stay out of everyone's way. We don't worry about, just life is going on. We're not worried about others. We're just going to stick to ourselves. Can I say something? Sometimes, check this now, write this down. You ready for this? Sometimes that's a sin. Now, here's what I mean. So my wife, she's in Disneyland, okay? A couple weeks ago, she's with my young daughter and her friend, and they're in Disneyland. They're standing in line, and my wife looks over, and she sees this baby attached to the front of this mom, and she's like choking on like the baby born. So I had just texted my wife and said, hey, where's the lawnmower? I have to, where's your lawnmower? Right? I got to cut the lawn. She's like, oh, it's over here. And then she's like, hey. And then I get this text from my daughter, and she's like, Mom just saved a baby again. And I'm like, wait, what? She's like texting in response to where's the lawnmower and not mentioning this. And I'm like, what? And the reason she said again is because years ago when we were in Uganda, my wife stepped out of a line at an airport and took a baby off a mom, and the baby had gone completely blue, and my wife took the baby and like breathed into it, saved its life. Now she's at Disneyland, sees the same thing with the baby, goes over the thing, unclips the baby, does a Heimlich on the baby, get the baby back again. Oh, it's breathing again. And, everyone's standing around clapping, right? Yeah, Mickey Mouse is like, and everyone's excited. And here's the thing that I realized in that moment. Listen, you can't change the world by minding your own business. Hear that now. You can't change the world by minding your own business. Some of you are too Canadian, right? If I was at that line at Disneyland, I'd look at it, I don't know what's going on with that baby. Maybe he likes blue. Who knows? His family likes him choking. I just stick to myself and move on. My wife's like, what's going on over there? She don't mind her own business. And that's a blessed thing. This is what we're called to do in the church. Paul's like, I'm going to encourage you. And encouraging someone could save their life. We are here to be for the world something beautiful and sacred for people. So now, here's what happens in the story. Something very interesting that I think unpacks some interesting things for us in this topic. Verse 7, on the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. This is Acts chapter 20. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, kept on talking until midnight. So he just keeps going and going and going, right? Verse 8, there were many lamps in the upstairs room where we were meeting. Seated in a window was a young man named Eutychus. Now remember that name. Underline that in your Bible if you have it. Who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the third story and was picked up dead. So Paul's going on and on. This kid falls over, dies in the street. Paul went down, threw himself on the young man, put his arms around him. Don't be alarmed, he said, he's alive. Then he went upstairs again, broke bread and ate. After talking until midnight, he left. The people took the young man home alive and were greatly comforted. This kid shows up to a Bible study and dies. You know what I got from that when I was reading this the other day? You gotta feel the fragility of life. Some of you, you're way too haughty. You think you're gonna be alive forever, especially if you're young. I mean, this kid was young. Some of you are young and you're like, oh, I'm not vulnerable. I'm immortal, man. I'm here forever. Listen, my friend, one of my pastor friends at Bayside, 2 weeks ago, he went to Hawaii with his family just before Easter. Go over there for 4 or 5 days, and they're there. And he's out with his sons in the water, and his wife takes a selfie and sends it to him and said, these two nice guys, there was two guys, and they were snorkeling right out in the water where she was sitting on the beach, and they were fishing. They were kind of with the spears, and they got this fish, and they brought it up to her, these two guys, and they give it to her, and they said, here's a fish, eat it tonight, whatever, and they start talking for 20 minutes and hanging out, and then she takes a selfie. She's like, hey, these two guys, they go back out. An hour later, my buddy and his wife are sitting up on the porch of their hotel, and they see these police boats circling, and the reason is because one of those guys went out swimming and drowned. An hour later, that guy was dead. And she said, as I was sitting on that beach talking to those two awesome dudes, God was telling me, tell them about Jesus, man. And I didn't. This is how fragile life is. Some of you, there's a chance some of you will not gather next week here in Barrie, Aurelia, online. You won't even be alive, and you will meet God. And the question on the table will be, do you want me to judge you based on your life or the life of Jesus for you? And I'm gonna when that day comes for me, I'm banking on the life of Jesus. I'm gonna trust Jesus, his righteousness, not me, his righteousness, not mine. This kid dies, and the Apostle Paul goes, and he throws himself on him and raises him from the dead. I love it because God uses young people to change the world, right? God uses the young. Eutychus, this kid was young, and his story is still being told. Some of you, you're young, and you feel like you don't have anything to offer. Listen, you got everything to offer because you have. This is why I love young people. God can call them to do anything, and they go. Some of you who get old, see, here's what happens. You get older. You get stuck in that mortgage rate, and you're like, God goes, hey, I need you to move here. I need you to go there. And you're like, yeah, but I'm at a 2.5% interest rate. I can't go anywhere. What do you? And God's like, wait, no, I need you to move to Cambodia. And you're like, but 2.5%. I mean, I can't believe this. I mean, I worked my whole life. But young people, they gone. Why? Because they got nothing to lose. They got no mortgage to worry about. This is why Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians. You are stuck in the trivial things of the world, the suburban life that doesn't let you live on the edge, and yet it is young people. Almost every great movement, revival, revolution in the church starts with young people. Young, if you're here, you're in the youth, you're a young adult, go for it. Whatever God's calling you to do it. Because you will change the world. And don't let people look down on you because you're young. I was a 29-year-old kid when I started our church, and I didn't know what I was doing, and Jesus used it for amazing things in my life. Now, here's the other thing. I want you to catch this. If you got Eutychus, right? The kid's name who fell out of the window was Eutychus. Again, struggles into strengths. Think about this for a second. This kid falls out of a window, and God's still using his story. Eutychus, though. So when I was studying this passage, I was like, what is Eutychus? What is that? So I went and looked it up in a commentary. You know what the name Eutychus literally means? Lucky. Now, I was like, okay, that's interesting. His name's Lucky. He was super lucky that the Apostle Paul went down and saved him. Must be nothing. Then, 2 weeks ago, listen to this. I went out with a guy for dinner. And we were sitting there talking, and he's a youth pastor at one of the local churches. And I looked at him and I said, you used to be an entrepreneur, you used to own your own company, and then you left all of that and became a youth pastor. Why did that happen? How did that happen? And he said, well, this is why. I was reading this book one day by a guy named Jamie Winship called Living Fearlessly. And in the book, Jamie Winship said, sometimes God speaks to you about your calling in life through your name. Now, check there for a second. Some of you are like, what is that? That sounds weird. Yes, through your name. So this guy's like, well, my name, whatever, my first name, that doesn't mean anything. And then he looked up his last name. And his last name was Foster. And he went in and looked up the etymology of it. And it literally said, a protector and a raising up person of young people. And he went, oh my gosh, God is calling me to leave my company and go work with students. It's literally baked into my last name. And I'm like, gosh, I wonder what that means for me. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna look up my name. So I went on ChatGPT and I said, hey, ChatGPT, what does the name Mark Clark mean? Right? Because I'm sure this is just wizardry and nonsense. Like, and again, guys, I don't want you going out, oh, well, let me look up my name. Oh, this means this. All right, don't do that, all right? But I did. Now, some of you should do it because it might actually help. When I did it, here's what I found. ChatGPT, in 30 seconds, said this. The name Mark comes from the Latin name Marcus, which is believed to be derived from Mars, the Roman god of war. This gives the name connotations of strength, courage, and masculinity, all right? So obviously it missed on that part, but I'm working on it, all right? So, but then listen to this. The last name, Clark, comes from the Old English and Old French word clerk, which means scribe or cleric. It originally referred to a scholar or clergyman, someone who would read and write. Over time, the name became a common occupational surname for those who worked in religious roles like pastors. Do you know anyone maybe who loves the academic writing, reading side of life and pastoring and being a clergyman? What? It's literally a description of me. Now, here's the thing. Some of you are like, okay, I need to know all of this for my calling to start doing something. Others of you, you need it as an affirmation of what you're already doing. And that's what that was for me. Because believe it or not, sometimes I question whether I should be doing this job or be doing something else. There's times where I daydream about, I don't want to just get up and preach I don't look out at these people. They sit in the same seat they've been sitting in for the 3 years I've been here. They haven't given a dime, and I just sit and preach to them and work. I said, what if I just did something else in my life? And then God reminded me 2 weeks ago, your name is to bring writing and academic thought and scribal stuff to pastoring and bring those worlds together. That's what your name, this is the name I've given you, man. Some of us need that affirmation. Some of us need to be reminded. Some of us need the calling in our life. So this lucky guy, he got lucky. Now, here's the last thing I'll say to us. The beautiful thing about this story is that the Apostle Paul was doing the important work, right? The text talks about he was teaching all night. He was going till midnight. And as he was doing the important work, an interruption took place. A kid falls out of a window, dies. And Paul has to stop the important work to go and deal with this interruption. But notice this. This is what stuck out to me. Almost every time through the 19 sermons that Luke tells us through the book of Acts, he talks about, when he says Paul was teaching, he tells us what Paul was teaching. Peter's preaching, he tells us what Peter preached. Here he doesn't even tell us what Paul was teaching on, but he does focus on Eutychus. He does focus on the interruption, because here's the thing. Listen to this now. Here's a principle for your life. Here's how you turn struggles into strengths. God takes what seems to be the interruptions of your life and turns them into the important stuff. See, even last week I was in my backyard and I was trying to fix a fence, and my crazy dog was trying to get out. And he's like, and I'm like, and I'm with my daughter and I'm trying to fix the fence. I'm like, dude, and the dog's like eating me. I'm like, get off me. And all of a sudden I see this kid, like this 16-year-old kid walking with his dog, and my dog's up barking and I'm like, oh man, I got to get this dog inside. I got to fix this fence. And the kid looks over at me and he's walking his dog up the street and he goes, hi, Pastor Mark. And I'm like, oh. So now I got to be like, hey, Tommy, how you doing? My dog's eating me. I don't have time for this, but let me come over the fence and sit and talk to you and pastor you and seem like I'm a good guy when all I want to do is get this dog who's eating my foot in the house. Interruption. Man, but those are the moments I got to spend 10 minutes with this kid. Hey, how you doing? What's going on in life? Those are the things God uses. Those look like interruptions, but they're the real stuff. So, legitimately, here's what happened. I was preaching this passage a couple weeks ago at our church, and it was the Saturday, it was the Friday night of preaching the passage, and my wife's car was a bit of a wreck, and so I took it to a little mechanic, and he fixed up something, and he looked at me, and he noticed that her front tire was busted. It was deflated, so I needed to bring it to what's called America's Tire, right? So they changed all the tires. So I pull it. I'm like, "Where's the closest one?" And I look it up, and I pull it in there, and guy comes out. He's like, "Hello." I said, "Hey, can you fix this tire?" "Yeah, great." He said, "What's your name?" Give him his name. Punched in the computer. He's like, "Okay, you have to come back tomorrow." I said, "Great." So I went. He fixed put like a temporary tire on. I went home. He called me in the morning. He's like, "Hey, your tire's ready. You come back." I come back. And as I'm driving, I got to preach that night. This is Saturday morning now. So I got to preach a service that night. And I literally said out loud to God, I don't have a good illustration of an interruption that you used to change the world in my life. And I literally said this in the car. Please give me one today. Okay? Literally said that as I'm driving to America's Tire. I pull up, get there, guy walks out, gives me my keys, says, "Your tire's all fixed, sir." I said, "Thank you very much." I go to get in the car, and he looks at me, and he says, "Hey, just before you go, I need to tell you something." I said, "What?" He said, "When you got here yesterday, I was in a very discouraged place. My family has fallen apart. I don't know what to do with my kids. And you mentioned your name, and I wrote it down on the computer for your report, and you had mentioned to me that you're a pastor. And so last night, before I left here, I went and looked you up online. I Googled your name. I said, there's a pastor, and his name is Mark Clark. And one of your sermons came up. And so as I drove home last night, I listened to a sermon you preached about joy. And as I listened to it, I realized that me and my wife, we've been having a disaster of a marriage, and our kids are all over the place, and all we've been talking about is how to find joy again. And we've been trying to find it in the things of the world. And as you preached, I began to sob in my car because you began to say that joy is not found in money or fame or sexual exploits or great in your business. It's only found in the person and the work of Jesus Christ. And I realized in the car in that moment, I've been looking in all the wrong places. And so I pulled up to my house after listening to that sermon, crying. And I walked in the house and I grabbed my wife and I put her on the couch and I put the YouTube back and I rewound it and I hit play. And the two of us sat there and watched that sermon for 45 minutes. And we realized Jesus is the only way to find joy. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, ah! I literally prayed to God on the way to pick up the car that he would give me an illustration of a time an interruption changed a life. And here's a guy handing me the keys saying, you know that flat tire you got? That wasn't for nothing, man. You changed my life. And the next weekend, I looked out, and that guy and his family were sitting in the audience, sobbing as I talked about the life and death of Jesus and believing in him to find true joy. See, God can take the interruptions. He can take the pain. He can take the suffering. He can take your quirks and the things that have caused you all kinds of mess in the past. He can take your struggles and turn them into strengths and change the world if you only take your life and entrust it to him, the one who actually, different than Eutychus, died and rose again from death to give you life. And so, Father, my hope and prayer is everyone hearing this, listening to this, would be encouraged by the fact that you are the God who raises the dead, and you rose Jesus from the dead, and you can take the dead souls in this room, the people who are sitting here thinking they got no future, and you can raise them from the dead and give them empowerment and encouragement for their life from this day forward if they entrust their hearts and their lives to you, Lord Jesus, rather than themselves, rather than money, rather than success. Do that work among this amazing church. In Jesus' great name, we pray together. Amen. Amen.